The first CARICOM Africa Summit was held this Tuesday, aimed at promoting closer collaboration between Africa, the African diaspora and the Caribbean. Protests in over 200 cities of Brazil on its Independence Day brought sectors mobilized against far-right President Jair Bolsonaro, while his supporters marched on the Supreme Court and Congress. The Taliban named a caretaker cabinet this Tuesday, dominated by members of the group's old guard, including a UN-sanctioned veteran. The announcement came after protests in the capital and other cities. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is from the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. The historic first CARICOM Africa Summit was held this Tuesday, aimed at strengthening economic and integration ties between the two regions. The summit was chaired by the President of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta's host country. Kenyatta stated that African and Caribbean countries have enormous potential to foster innovative partnerships in the so-called blue economy. With the theme Unity Across Continents and Oceans, Opportunities for Deepening Integration, leaders who participated in the event noted that it not only sought to contribute to boosting trade and investment opportunities between Africa and the Caribbean, but also to increase solidarity to address global challenges such as access to vaccines against COVID-19 and economic development. And President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, spoke on the historic occasion of the summit regarding the spirit of the event.
We must become the architects of our common future, where Africa and the Caribbean are joined together by a common goal of ensuring that our peoples have prosperity.
Also addressing the CARICOM Africa Summit, Prime Minister of Jamaica, Andrew Holness, noted that the relations between the two regions can be strengthened with mutual economic and social benefits.
Sports, culture, education, tourism, and the commerce between our regions to improve economic benefits and enhance people-to-people connections.
During her speech to the summit, Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Motley, referred to the African heritage present in Caribbean cultures, that this represents a strong and unbreakable bond between both regions separated by the Atlantic Ocean.
This is where we have to carry our people. Your continent is our ancestral home, and we are related to you, as I just heard from Prime Minister Rowley, in so many ways, because Africa is in us and we're not simply from Africa.
In his remarks at the first CARICOM Africa Summit, Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Keith Rowley, praised the timeless relations between Africa and the Caribbean.
Africa has been CARICOM's invaluable partner in several platforms, such as the United Nations within the Group of 77, and in our dealings with Europe under the umbrella of what is now the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States. United, we have known success.
Gaston Brown, Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, also addressed important issues of common interest during the summit, which was held via video conference and streamed live on several online platforms.
And almost 60% of North Americans are fully vaccinated. Only 3% of Africans can say the same. This pattern of inequity is obvious in its ugliness and prevalence. Therefore, we must act together to change it.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ralph Gonsalves, expressed his country's will to collaborate in order to improve living standards and development in both the Caribbean and Africa.
The time has come for us to build institutionally a mechanism for the practical realization of the agenda which has been outlined in the concept note to the summit.
President of Malawi, Lazarus Chakwera, also addressed the summit, describing it as another milestone in relations between Africa and the Caribbean.
Africa CARICOM Summit as another milestone towards the creation of a grand coalition of like-minded and like-mannered nations. beyond embracing and celebrating it, we fully intend to leverage the opportunities.
And the historic first CARICOM Africa Summit was not only attended by heads of state, also present were prominent leaders of industry and other sectors. Strive Masuriawa, a businessman from Zimbabwe, leading a technology group Econet Global, shared his thoughts about the vaccine crisis affecting both regions.
Our work began in November last year, and it became immediately apparent that we would, even with all the money, it would not be possible to buy vaccines because they had already been hoarded by the major countries.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Brazil saw protests in over 200 cities on its Independence Day this Tuesday. Board sectors mobilised against far-right President Jair Bolsonaro, while his supporters marched on the Supreme Court and Congress. The National Out With Bolsonaro campaign, which brings together a range of social movements, political parties and trade unions, organised mobilisations to reject Bolsonaro's policies and demand his impeachment. This Tuesday marks the 199th anniversary of the proclamation of Brazil's independence. An occasion was used by both opponents and supporters of the Bolsonaro government to take to the streets. Bolsonaro had called on his supporters to rally outside the Supreme Court as part of his long-running attacks on several Supreme Court judges that he claims have acted against him. Bolsonaro, whose popularity is at an all-time low, sought a show of force in the face of a flagging economy, soaring unemployment and inflation, and a series of investigations targeting him and his inner circle. And as mentioned, Brazil's far-right president, Jair Bolsonaro, called for 1 million of his supporters to travel to the country's capital, Brasilia, to protest against the Supreme Court this Tuesday. Tens of thousands showed up, but the court continued operating as usual. Our correspondent Brian Meir reports.
For months, Jair Bolsonaro and his followers have been threatening to shut down the Brazilian Supreme Court after it authorized a series of corruption investigations against the beleaguered president and his family. Last week, President Bolsonaro and his backers called for 1 million people to come to Brasilia, the capital, to protest in front of the Supreme Court on September 7th, Brazilian Independence Day. Turnout was big, but it was a lot lower than expected, and the court remained open.
Brazil is in crisis. Inflation and unemployment are skyrocketing. People are going hungry, and the government is taking the luxury of calling for street protests. It spent a lot of money to incite criminal acts based on goals from military dictatorship, like interventions against government institutions like the Supreme Court.
Hundreds of trucks and buses, many bankrolled by right-wing politicians connected to agribusiness, arrived in the capital, mainly from the conservative Brazilian North and Midwest. The Bolsonaros may have managed to put tens of thousands of people on the streets, but many of them seemed confused about why they were there.
We are criminalizing communism, the toga communism of the Federal Supreme Court, which is implanting communism in our country and censoring our freedom. And this is why we support Bolsonaro. We are against the criminalization of the toga.
It may have been the largest protest in Brasilia in 4 years, but the fact that it was smaller than expected and that turnout was even lower in other cities shows how the multiple crises underway in Brazil are eroding the far-right government's support. Brian Meir, teleSUR, Brasilia.
Industrial workers in Uruguay carried out a general strike in defence of collective bargaining and against privatisation, as well as to demand better pay. The Federation of Industrial Unions led mobilisations to demand decent wages and better employment benefits from the government. Demonstrators marched from various points in the capital Montevideo to the National Labour Office in order to reject the privatisation of state-owned companies. Union representatives also announced a fresh mobilisation for September 15th against the government's economic policy. Over the past year and a half, public and private sector workers have experienced a fall in their real wages. The Venezuelan government and opposition sectors reached partial agreements during the second round of talks in Mexico City that concluded on Monday. The president of the National Assembly of Venezuela and head of the government delegation, Jorge Rodriguez, explained the agreements reached.
The first of these is that which refers to the ratification, defense and sovereignty of Venezuela over Guyana Esequiba, a profound declaration of support, respect for history, to the right that our homeland has since the times that we were a captaincy general to the territory of Guyana Esequiba, and emphasizes that it is the Geneva Agreement of 1966, the only instrument that Venezuelans know to settle amicably with the Federative Republic of Guyana.
Jorge Rodriguez also outlined the second agreement reached with the opposition sectors, which refers to the recovery of Venezuela's assets held abroad.
It is about the need for Venezuela to rescue, to recover the assets, to recover the money that is deposited in foreign accounts and does not belong to anyone else but to each woman and man of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and the money be quickly used and mainly used wherever it comes from Venezuela accounts overseas, from the rescue of Venezuelan assets, from using resources that Venezuela is entitled to and are in hands of multilateral such as the person appointed by the International Monetary Fund for the economic recovery in the post-pandemic period.
And a spokesperson for the Venezuelan opposition sector's delegation to the talks in Mexico, Gerardo Blyde, stressed that justice will be the first topic to be addressed during the next round, to be held on September 24th.
We agreed that among the two agenda themes for the next round, the first will be the justice system in Venezuela, a deep and complex issue, but one that must begin the democratic reinstitutionalization of the country, which for us means having an independent and sovereign judicial system that can decide without political interference.
Meanwhile, in Venezuela, President Nicolas Maduro highlighted the success of the talks between opposition sectors and the government and praised the outcome as an achievement for all Venezuelans.
Well, here, happy, ending today's working day, Monday, September 6th, with the good news from Mexico. We have seen the press conferences in Mexico. Two very important documents were signed and a joint communiqué will be issued between the Venezuelan government and the platform of unity of the opposition allied to Guaidó. I'm happy, and I agree. We achieved it in Mexico. We achieved it again in Mexico. Achieved what, you ask? To sit down the extremist opposition, to talk about the important issues of the economy, of the society, the issues of the country. It is a success in Mexico, but a success for all Venezuelan men and women, for peace, for recovery. We did it again. Congratulations to Venezuela. Thanks to Mexico. See you.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. On Tuesday, the Taliban announced the caretaker cabinet granting key positions to two long-standing personalities of the group who were prominent during the 20-year US war and military occupation of Afghanistan and a UN-sanctioned veteran. Prior to the announcement of the new cabinet on Tuesday, the Taliban dispersed a protest in Kabul against Pakistani intervention, firing against the crowd and arresting journalists and other civilians. Several people are reported to have been injured. Protests also took place in different cities of Afghanistan, expressing support for the resistance to the Taliban and criticising the alleged Pakistani support for the recent military offensive against resistant forces in the northern province of Panjshir. Dozens of women also demonstrated in the cities of Kabul and the northern city of Masar-e-Sharif, calling for their inclusion in Afghan politics. In particular, they called for representation in the next government. The cabinet announcements have so far not included any women.
Why are our women not included in the political issues? When they say we are having talks and they are voting for the formation of the new government, there is no any women anywhere in their voting campaign. Why they don't want to have a woman as a representative of all women in their voting and talks or to participate? We demand the creation of secure jobs, both for women and men, and on the rights to participate in politics for women, the rights of election and selection of women to leadership positions, the right to private ownership, working rights for women in the judicial and legal sector, the right to freedom of speech, and the comments of ideas of women must be safe. The upcoming new government must release a clear description of women's rights in the Charter of the Islamic Emirate.
United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin met with Qatar's Emir and other top officials in Doha for talks on Afghanistan shortly after the Taliban came to have taken full control of the country. Blinken and Austin are the most senior US officials to visit the Gulf since the Taliban's rapid seizure of Afghanistan in August. The US Secretary of State said no country had done more than Qatar during the US military withdrawal and evacuation efforts from Afghanistan. Qatar's Foreign Minister, meanwhile, said that Qatari teams were continuing to work towards reopening Kabul International Airport, which the Taliban took control of when US troops left on August 30th. Qatar, which hosts a major US airbase, hosted peace talks with the Taliban, which opened in an office in Doha in 2013 with tacit permission from the United States. And during his meeting with the Qatari Emir, the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, said that the Taliban had reiterated a pledge to allow Afghans to freely leave Afghanistan.
We've also been engaging with the Taliban on this topic, including in recent hours. They've said that they will let people with travel documents freely depart. We will hold them to that. So will dozens of other countries. The international community is watching to see if the Taliban will live up to their commitments. All told, this has been a remarkable outpouring of support under incredibly challenging circumstances and a powerful testament to the world of Qatar's generosity and statesmanship.
The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization warned that instability in Afghanistan is threatening winter food crops, aggravating existing food insecurity.
Basic services in Afghanistan are collapsing, and food and other life-saving aid is about to run out. As we heard, the Secretary General has warned of a humanitarian catastrophe. We urge international donors to support this appeal fast and generously.
We are talking already, even before the events that have unfolded in recent weeks during the month of August, we're talking about a situation where 1 in 3 Afghans are acutely food insecure. A situation that's dramatic by any stretch of the imagination.
The search continues after 6 Palestinians escaped from a high-security Israeli prison on Monday, leaving the regime red-faced and sparking celebrations in the streets by Palestinians. Israeli authorities acknowledged that they have no clue regarding the whereabouts of the Palestinians who escaped through a tunnel in one of the Jilbera prison's bathrooms. Jilbera, which opened in 2004 during the second Palestinian Intifada or uprising, is a high-security site where hundreds of Palestinians are detained. Meanwhile, the Israeli policy of mass incarceration of Palestinians, including children, without trial and in poor conditions continues to spark international condemnation. There are currently almost 5,000 Palestinians held up in Israeli prisons, including over 200 children. The United Nations informed that at least 780,000 people have been displaced in the Democratic Republic of the Congo in the last 3 months, amid constant clashes between the army and rebels. Susanna Takalik, humanitarian coordinator in the country, reported that 700,000 of the displaced since June this year were registered in Beni and 80,000 in Masisi and the surrounding areas in the eastern province of North Kivu. She noted that many of the displaced lost members of their families and are in an extremely vulnerable situation. The UN official also reported that the humanitarian community has lost at least 5 workers, while others have been kidnapped or injured since early 2021, while access to displaced victims represents a constant challenge. The Chinese government has rejected claims by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's Secretary General that Beijing is building new nuclear missile launch facilities. Spokesperson of the Chinese Foreign Ministry, Wang Wenbin, expressed concern over the exaggerated claims by NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg that China represents an expanding nuclear threat. The Foreign Ministry official noted that Beijing's defensive strategy in this area includes keeping its nuclear arsenal at the minimum level. And we've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For teleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.